Welcome to the Tower Yoga Podcast, where we dive deep into the heart of yoga and community. Come along with us as we explore the transformative power of yoga, share insights, and inspire one another on this journey of life. I'm Kellee Williams, and I'm your host and the co-founder of Tower Yoga. Thank you for joining our yoga community. Hello and welcome, Tower Yogis, to another episode of the podcast. The podcast, what's that? I'm here today with Nat, who is quickly becoming a very cherished member to me. I really like learning from you so far in the way of herbalism and other stuff, which we'll be getting into in today's episode, gearing up for our collaboration. If you're listening in real time, Nat and I will be co-facilitating an event happening on Friday, December 13th, and that's going down from 6 to 7:30. It's yoga and herbalism for the holidays, so we'll talk more about that. I'm really excited to dive in to learning more about you, Nat, or having the listeners, as well as myself, learn more about you. So I just want to welcome you and give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, to share anything that you want the listeners to know. And in the past, I've asked guests to share things about their cultural upbringing if they want to, or if you know your sun, moon and rising signs, or anything that's just fun.
Okay, well, thank you, Kellee, for having me. I'm so excited to co-facilitate with you this upcoming workshop. I feel like just the medicine of yoga and herbs together is just really magical, and I hope, we're able to create just a grounding space in this holiday season for folks. Yeah, so let me introduce myself. My name is Nat. I use they, them pronouns. I wear several hats. I'm a licensed therapist, so right now I have a private practice that centers the healing of queer and trans folks of color, kind of at the intersection of spirituality and mental health. I also do spiritual work, so I'm a working psychic medium, and that looks a few different ways. I give readings. I also co-facilitate an intuition development class with my teacher, Nellie Resnick. So we're just finishing up our second cohort of that. It's called Intuition Immersive. And then
I want to do that.
Okay. I'll let you know for next year for sure. And then I'm also an herbalist. So I studied under Karen Rose in her Sacred Vibes apprenticeship program. It's the art and practice of spiritual herbalism. So that's out in Brooklyn, New York, if folks are interested. Her program is now online. But so my background and teachings in herbalism is really from a spiritual perspective. So the way Karen teaches is about building a relationship to plants, really like grounded in indigenous wisdom and knowing of like, we don't just take a plant for a thing, right? We develop and we are in reciprocal relationship to plants. So part of that is getting to know their emotional side, their energetic side, right? What shifts happen in our own lives when we slow down and we sit and we study and we be with the plants. We allow them to teach us what they have to know. So that's a little bit about what I do in the world.
Yeah, that is definitely a lot of different hats. I love it. So what's your background with yoga? I was going to say, how did you find yoga? But I like to say, how did yoga find you? Yeah.
I was excited thinking about this question because, in so many ways, I'm like a yoga baby. Like this past year, the past like 11 or 12 months is the first time in my life that I've been consistently doing yoga, like several times a week and showing up for myself. I had an intention at the beginning of the year about getting more serious about the practice because I was in a time of huge transition. I was moving back to California after being in New York for about a little over a decade. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like a baby giraffe in class. I feel like it's been a year and I'm like just getting my downward dog right, But so in some ways I feel like a baby, but then when I start to think about it, the first time I took a class was in like 2009, and yoga has been with me throughout different chapters of my life where I've needed a grounding practice to remember like my energetic sovereignty, right? So it's it's always been like me on YouTube or me in my head at home, like on the mat, like with a dog somewhere on the ground with me. But it's very much been a part of my life. Yeah, since 2009. I think when yoga first found me, I was having a lot of transitions, a lot of sort of like challenges as well. I was like, let me paint the picture.
Please.
The mid 2000s, I had side bangs, working as a full-time barista at Starbucks. I was in the Bay, right? Like it was a moment in time. And I was very stressed, and I was somebody who was kind of at the beginning of being like, "Oh, I think I have some trauma to work through." Right? So being like, "Well, what does that look like?" And then also realizing, "Oh, I think I'm gay and I can't like run from that anymore." Like I'm gay. Like what the hell do I do with this information? So there was actually a yoga to the people studio down the street from the coffee shop where I worked. And so I had a coworker be like, come take a class with me. And I was like, I don't know, like that's not really my thing. I'm just not like that. Like all the stories we tell ourselves as young people. But I ended up going to a few classes, and they were all like community based, like donation based classes. And one thing that really stuck with me was that at the end of the class, I would like cry sometimes. And
Hmm.
that was like such an added benefit. I like didn't understand it at the time, but I think sort of the act and the practice of like intentionally getting back into my body and really slowing down and allowing myself to just feel, when I've been doing so much work to like not feel or be like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed by this. Like, let me just like disassociate or go on with life, right? I
Hmm.
think these yoga classes for me were a time to actually practice like, I can be in my body and like I can feel safe in my body, like safe enough to slow down and feel. And I can release and it's okay.
Mm.
So I actually like I hadn't thought about that in so long because it was like what 15 years ago almost. But yeah, that's how yoga found me, and it's like really special.
Yeah, it's such a space,
Mhm.
not just like a thing to do. It's like almost like a place you go to. It can
Mhm.
be, you know. I that feeling is so like visceral. That's really, and I had a student one time come up to me, and she happened to be like, it was like a period of time she was crying a lot towards the end of class. Like I noticed, but I've been teaching for like 15 years, and I'm like, yep, tears, sweat, it all happens. It's just so normalized to me. And she comes up to me and she's like, Kellee, I don't know why I've been like crying so much in class recently. She's like, I I'm not sad. And she's like, I had some things like happen that I've like processed and I've worked through like mentally. And I'm like, yeah, now it's your body's opportunity. And she was like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That is so key. I'm so glad you bring that up because, I think in our society and also in sort of like Western psychology, we look at healing or processing through a very sort of like one dimensional lens of like, if we just think about it and talk about it verbally enough, then we're healed, right? Or like, then that's it. And I think like talk therapy, processing verbally are extremely important pieces of the pie. But what we know from like ancient wisdom, ancient practices like yoga, right? Like indigenous knowing, like we cannot forget the body. Like our minds and our bodies cannot be separated. As much as we like want to sometimes, we like want to live up here. We can't forget the body. And there's so much information to be accessed when we're able to slow down and be with you. So I love that you
Yeah, yeah. And as someone who I like identify as like a very verbal processor, but then I do things like, mountain running and yoga and stuff. So I guess maybe I'm both, but I'm a very verbal processor.
yeah,
And like a lot of healing for me, I feel like really started with that talk therapy. And so it is important, like you said, but it doesn't end there. And sometimes I wish it could, like because like the work with the body and stuff is really intense. But it doesn't just start and end there. It's one piece of like the whole pie. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's like some of the stuff we just have to feel.
Yeah. So in your perspective, so yoga helps. Does how do herbs help facilitate
Yeah,
that? It's a piece of the pie too, right? Could be.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like working with plants it's like building a relationship, right? So I think like being able to study and learn, talk about them, like read the books is really important. And also, if you're wanting to sort of deepen a relationship to a plant, like for example, we're going to be talking about nervines or plants that nourish our nervous system during our workshop on the 13th. It's important that you slow down and be with the plant and notice when you're taking it or you're interacting with it, what does it bring up, right? Plants are a beautiful way to connect to spirit or to connect to your inner knowing, whatever you want to call that thing. They're a way to sort of refocus our attention, okay? And what I mean by that is like when we get caught up in the day to day, like we're all busy. We all have families and careers and jobs and da 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 side hustles. It can be so easy to miss the small whispers or the small intuition, that voice that's there that's like, I don't want to do that thing. Or my stomach always clenches when I'm around this person. Or wow, this job I've been at for so long and I'm kind of just going to keep doing it. But like, I feel like my passions have fallen by the wayside, right? Like those little things that feel so easy to just push aside. Plants can amplify that for us, right? Plants are they have energetics, right? So plants are associated with temperature, hot and cold. They're also associated with planets, so like Saturn, Venus, right? Earth, the moon. And so based on the energetics of the plant, that can sort of guide you with like where you want to show up for yourself in your life, right? Like where do you want to pay more attention? I feel like I'm going to say healing a million times during this conversation, but like as we're on our healing journeys, plants can reveal to us or amplify to us where do we need to like listen and calm down, One thing that felt important for me to share in our upcoming workshop was specifically teaching about plants that support the nervous system. Physiologically, there's so many benefits, right? I'm going to be teaching about oat straw, a skull cap, and probably lemon balm. There's so many benefits, right? So, like, skull cap supports like our central nervous system. It sort of like cools or freezes when we're in our like spinny, oh my gosh, fight or flight. Like, I can't get out of my own way. I'm just so anxious right now. It calms and cools very quickly. Oat straw has this amazing technology where it actually, when taken regularly, it rebuilds the coating on our myelin sheaths, which is the connectors on our nerve cells. So oat straw has the power to like recoat that. That sheath gets worn away when we're chronically stressed.
Mm.
And when we're chronically stressed, again, it's harder to get messages. It's harder to connect to our inner wisdom and our desires and our knowing, right? So working with plants, particularly, the nervines is my sort of like offering to share like, hey, we are existing in really wild times. We are so overstimulated. There's so much happening around us, right? Like our brains actually weren't built to take in so much information, so much collective violence and trauma. Like we are all inundated right now. And so, how can we partner with plants to quiet our mind, to get back into our bodies? And remember, like, I'm still here. Like, there's power here. Like, I get to tap in and tune in whenever I want. But how can I sort of like remember or remind myself, okay, I'm in my little fight or flight zone. I'm activated right now. What are the tools I can reach for to come back down to earth? Plants are
Mhm.
like our best friends for that.
I was just thinking, like, I refer to plants, I'm pretty deep into herbalism myself as like tools. But when I'm thinking about it in more a reciprocal way, the word that was coming to mind was friends, more so. So it's really interesting. And then I think I also forget sometimes, like, my body is a vessel and it's constantly, I'm taking in so much going on. And also there's like Wi-Fi and there's all these other things that we haven't even really studied how affect this vessel. And so I do think that when I am consuming, especially regularly, consistently, these friends and their benefits, I feel more like inside the vessel, meaning I feel myself, my own energy, almost like you were taking it back to like how yoga was helping you. I feel myself and myself more. In the same way, when you take a deep breath, you're like, here I am, you know? So, two things on the oat straw and the skull cap. I do feel like those things have helped me hear and see so much more as the amplifiers you were talking about. Oat straw I encountered because I learned this infusion that was essentially like a replacement of a multivitamin. I was just like sick of taking so many like horse pills every morning and then like burping them up all day. So I was like, is there something I can do? And so I learned this infusion that oat straw was like the base of it. And it has like so many vitamins. It's so vitamin rich.
Absolutely, absolutely. It has a ton of vitamins, and it's so powerful, but it's so gentle and accessible. Like, oat straw is from the same plant as oatmeal, right? So, like,
Mhm.
similarly, if we're eating oatmeal every day, we can get some of those, like, soothing, calming, anti-anxiety benefits, but oat straw is amazing. Yeah.
Oats are calming. And even like there's oat baths. It's like, calm down. So good.
Right, like, just how it's, like, calming inside, it's good for the skin, calming outside as well.
And then skull cap, I haven't done in a ton of like recipes, but I've smoked it a lot.
Oh,
I've put it, yes, skull cap. It's I know it's like kind of like a lung tonic, but there's been different, like herbal rolls that I've made,
mhm.
and skull cap, mullein leaf. Those
Mm,
are a lot of times like the base that I'll use, and then I'll throw in some like rose or other things, and then maybe I have like some ceremonial tobacco I brought from Peru. I'll put like a tiny bit in there if I'm trying to just pray or something like that. And or if I know I'm going to have like a hard conversation or something like that, that is good for helping with communication and whatever. So, but yeah, maybe I need to try some. I have been for the last 6 months doing like a year of straight edge. So I haven't smoked anything like that in a long time. But that that's a that's a one that's actually really nice for anyone. And even like my sister, I was trying to help her like calm down on smoking like regular cigarettes. And so I had rolled some that still had some like American Spirit in there, but like a little sprinkle, almost like a spliff, except for with skull cap and mullein leaf and rose petals and stuff like that. So then it was just taking in a little less, didn't have all the tar and stuff like that. And I don't know if she kept up with that, but I rolled her a ton of them for Christmas or something. Yeah. But yeah, those are two things that I've used it for, and they've really, really, like I said, you mentioned the amplification. I do feel like it makes my eyes see more things I would miss in the day that are important for me in how I navigate, and it helps me hear more of what is coming from the inside rather than the outside.
exactly, exactly. Yes, and so working with plants in this way, that's what our ancestors did, you know? Like, my teacher, the way she teaches is like, "Hey, they did not have Google." So one of our I think this was, like, level 2. So our project for the level was, like, a plant is gonna come to you. You're not gonna choose it. It's gonna come to you through meditation. It's gonna start showing up, whatever. You're gonna be in relationship with it for the entirety of this level, which was around, like, 6 to 8 months. She's like, "You're not allowed to Google it. You just have to spend time with it." So it's like,
Mm.
sleep with it under your pillow, draw it, meditate with it in the morning. You know, for some folks, if you want to make a tea with it, you can, but it's really about interacting with it in all its like multidimensional ways and see what it brings up for you, right? So man, that took me on a whole journey. But right, really the amplification of like what happens when we slow down, we dedicate, time because that's like so precious in this society. It's like
Most precious resource ever.
what happens when we actually can slow down and give such intentional time to one plant? It's amazing.
And if we're talking about friendship, you're the same person, but you're a different friend to each person.
Mhm.
And so that plant is the same plant, but it'll interact with you differently than it does your partner or your friend or whoever. And so
Mhm.
I love that it's like, hey, just dedicate this time. I have another friend who is not trained, but just on her own, like living in the wild, nomadic, and kind of travels around. Although I do think she's like put some roots down recently. She will have a plant come to her in some unique way, and then she'll dedicate a year to it. I'm just like, she's like the embodiment of like slow time. And this world is like crazy to me, but she's like figured it out. Yarrow was something that came to her that she spent a lot of time with, and she's taught me a lot. And it's cool because it's like local around here. But I'm curious, what plant came to you?
Yeah. This is a whole journey. Are you familiar with Datura?
Yes.
So this was probably like 2018 when I was in level 2. I never heard of the Datura plant before. So shortly after she gave us the assignment, people started texting me about this plant, calling it by different names. So like it's also referred to as like jimsum weed.
Mm.
Mm, I think it's also referred to as like mamoy. I had like several people be like, because they knew I was in the herbalism program, and asthma is something I've like worked with my entire life, and one of the reasons why I wanted to learn about herbalism to support me as I'm like dealing with this chronic issue. And so several people had been like, "Oh, have you heard of this plant? Like, I think some people use it for asthma, but I think it's also kind of like a hallucinogen, And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I kind of just took note. And then I think this was so like two or three different people texted me. And then later on the same week, I was at a friend's house for dinner, and I had like looked it up, Jimson weed. And so I had like a picture in my head of like what it looked like. So I was talking to my friend. I was at her house for dinner, and she was like, "Oh, what's up with your herbalism program?" And I was telling her the assignment. And then I looked behind her on her refrigerator, and there was like a wedding invite, and like all over the wedding invite was Datura blossoms. And I was like, shit, I think this is the plant. Like, I actually think this is the plant I have to walk with. And she was like, okay. So
She's like, "Are you coming to my wedding though?"
I did, yes, I did. And so, yeah, that took me on a wild ride because of the information of like, people use it in ceremony. I didn't want to like physically interact with it or consume it. Right. So for me, it was about let me get a hold of some seeds and try to grow it. Oh, also, I met somebody that same week who was like, I was telling her about Datura, and she worked at a botanical garden. She's like, oh, we have some Datura blooms. Do you want like some seed pods? It was just crazy, all the alignment.
Yeah.
So for the next like 6 to 8 months, yeah, I grew it in a little pot in my little apartment. I made an oil out of the leaves. I had some of the seeds on my altar. So when I'd meditate or just sort of be quiet in the morning or journal, I would draw it. And I had really intense dreams. It brought up a lot of grief for me, which, like, as you probably know, or as a lot of folks know, like asthma is associated with grief in the lungs. And so if we think about like this condition, lung conditions being like ancestral, collective, like there's grieving that has to be done to keep the lungs healthy. And that was very much where I was at of like, oh, I have some healing to do. I have some grieving to do for myself individually of what I've gone through, but also for some family stuff. So it was gnarly, but it actually prepared me to kind of step into more of like the psychic and mediumship work once I sort of went through that journey. It was almost like, you think this is hard? No, this is you sharpening, this is you building your foundation. You think you just want to be like a social worker the rest of your life? Like, no, like you're gonna be called
Mhm.
to be doing other things, bitch.
I
Like,
love it.
so I love Datura very much, and I don't take her medicine lightly. She's very potent. She's poison
What?
medicine. Yeah. And she grows all over Fresno, right? Like I see her by like freeway overpasses, or like
Mhm.
you're like in a field and it's like pretty yellow and brown, there's not much around. You'll see like giant sort of bushes of Datura with these like white blossoms.
Mhm.
Grow anywhere. They're like so resilient. And I've seen quite a few. at Woodward, if you like walk along the trails, there's some on the trails as well. They don't need a lot of water. And even like in really hot climates, they're kind of chilling, so they're around,
Yeah,
you know.
they're definitely around because I remember one time there was one of my friends was like, there was maybe some like in the neighborhood, and at the time I had a dog, and the dog was like, would romp around and like grab things, and she was like, dogs aren't supposed to eat
Yeah,
Datura, like it's toxic for them. And I was like,
yeah,
but I think there was some in my backyard because it was just like sort of an unattended to yard, just a wild yard. And then I kind of started noticing everyone was like, how are these dogs alive? 'Cause-
yeah. No, no, and just like for the listeners, yeah, Datura should not be consumed unless you are like with a skilled healer. Like Datura's medicine is potent and it's energetic. So like if it's coming to you, it can teach you through energy. You don't have to be smoking it and taking it, right? Like there's so much wisdom to be gained from building a relationship to it energetically.
yeah, awesome. So this is really cool because everything's sort of tied in with the herbs and the yoga and your like therapeutic work that led into also diving into your psychic work. And I love it. And it all intersects.
Yes. Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah, I think of it as like I can't have one without the other, and they kind of fill in the gaps, you know,
Hmm.
each other in terms of like modalities.
Are there any like projects or initiatives? I know you were talking about how once a year you co-facilitate that like intuitive development course, but is there anything else with any of those modalities, any of
Mhm.
these modalities that you have going on coming up in 2025, I guess?
Oh, okay, so intuition immersive, we teach that probably about once a quarter. So it's a 12-week program and it's six biweekly classes. So we teach it several times a year actually. That is so our next cohort is probably going to be starting up in February 2025. And in terms of other stuff, I'm not sure yet. Definitely more like just giving more workshops to the community. My private practice has been pretty full. If folks like are signed up for my newsletter, I usually send out, you know, info when like I have spots opening up. But it's intuition immersive for now. And then if people are interested in readings, like a mediumship reading or a tarot reading, they can also just book me on my website. And I do those out of En Las Nubes Spa in Tower or online.
Cool. So where can folks find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so my website is sunshadowhealing.com. And, that has all my services. That's where you can book me. And then you can also find me on Instagram at sunshadowhealing. And that's where I just post more of like the community stuff I do, like pop up stuff, workshops, etc.
Cool. And then, of course, there's the collaboration that we're putting together on Friday, December 13th, 6 to 7:30. And I'll be leading the yoga, and then Nat will be sharing a lot about the different herbs that we're highlighting. Nervines are one of them. We're really focused on ways that we can nourish and kind of like prime our nervous system and immune system for like the holiday season. A lot comes up, speaking of energetics and emotions and all that kind of stuff. And if not personally, definitely collectively, you know, I really feel like change and like the new year personally happens more around like fall, but at the end of summer, um, but or like spring feels like very new year, you know. But the calendar year ends in December, and then we're going into a new calendar year, and we are living in those systems. And I think that something that has come up between you and I as we're talking about collaborating for this workshop is like change and changing with the change. And, as we change, there's growing pains, and we need like good friends and allies to help support so that way we can do that. It's painful, even if we want it. It's weird and disorienting sometimes. And we're all different and we all, I think, respond to change a little differently. But I
Mm-hmm.
think no matter who you are, that you will definitely take something away. We're going to make a blend and have it kind of boiling in our cauldron that we can sip on as you speak after the yoga or before. I don't know when that's going to happen yet. And then participants, you will have the opportunity to make your own medicinal tea blend to start consuming, hopefully on the daily,
Yes.
as we work through the holiday and into the new year. And hopefully, you start really, really set for this new year. That's the hope. And if you're not listening to this in real time, then maybe we'll be teaching another thing together by that time. But you can definitely reach out to Nat at Sun Shadow Healing
Yes.
is your website. Yeah. So, how do you feel after sharing your story and talking
Yeah.
about herbs?
I feel good. I get a little nerdy, like I always feel very energized by these conversations, getting to connect with people just around healing and plants. And, I think like reflecting on changing with the change, it feels good being in community where it's like this is going to be a chaotic chapter. Like everyone has so much going on. How can we like practice growing our capacity together? So I have my spiral moments like throughout the days and weeks. Like I'm a human too. And so it just feels really good getting to talk about this stuff with you. And then I'm looking forward to just being in community with others.
Yeah, yeah, it's been really cool to get to know you and share practice with you over this last like almost year, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Cool.
yeah. And that's been really, really awesome. So I look forward to continuing to practice together and collaborate more together. Before we go, I'll just remind everyone that the workshop is happening Friday, December 13th, 6 to 7:30. And then before we go, is there anything else you want to impart or share?
No, I'm just excited to see you all there. Yeah. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Nat. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in time and space. And we would be totally happy to have you in our workshop and to see you around the studio.
Yeah.
All right. Yay. Namaste. Bye bye. Thanks again for listening in and joining our yoga community. If it so resonates, please share this episode with a friend. Remember, the inner light of awareness within me honors the inner light of awareness within you. Until next time, stay grounded, stay present, and keep flowing with grace.